Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday, March 11th. Appreciate your flexibility with the date change. For the last year or so, we've been doing the first Tuesday of the month at noon for the LegRep Network meeting. But some of the WSSDA staff, including myself, were invited to attend a community of practice with the Lieutenant Governor's office. He has been hosting for the last several years this concept around civic health, civil discourse, and doing some real strong community building and identification of resources with a lot of educational, but also other stakeholder partners from throughout the state. So he didn't check with me before identifying the first Tuesday of the month, and scheduled those meetings when we had previously done LegRep Network meetings. So anyway, I appreciate y'all mixing it up. If y'all wouldn't mind muting your microphones, we have a relatively small group, but sometimes that feedback makes it difficult to listen. I know many of you are maybe eating lunch or driving to your next meeting or in two Zooms at the same time, possibly. So thanks for being here for this one. It is the legislative session, and my hope is to give you some updates, but my other hope is to also learn a little bit, kind of take a temperature on, in terms of the resources we've provided, are you getting what you need? How can we refine or tailor our services so that you're getting more targeted information that would be useful to you? And some of this will imply that you're participating, reading the existing resources. And if you're not, that's going to be my first starting point, and we're going to take a look at those first. So we are recording today so that this will be available to other school directors who couldn't join us. And if you would help us by starting by introducing yourself in the chat, just say what school district you're from, how long you've been a LegRep, or why you're here in particular, that would be helpful just as a means of introducing yourself to one another so we know who's in the Zoom room today, especially since lots of screens are off, which is perfectly fine. That's the benefit of a noon webinar. So I just made sort of a high level PowerPoint presentation as a starting point for our conversation, and assume that it will inform a deeper dive on other issues and questions to come. If you have questions, if you wouldn't mind just typing them in the chat, that would be hugely helpful, and I'll take pauses here and there. Actually, maybe Marisa Peliquin, you're like such a great partner in this. Would you be willing to interrupt me if you see a question pop up? Although you're muted, so I still can't hear. Darn. Marisa is the vice chair of the legislative committee, and we meet every single week on Thursdays. And she often keeps me on track. So you all are in for a world of hurt if she can't keep me on track since she's on mute. Just kidding. My boss is here, Trisha, so she might be able to help too. Anyway, let's get started. So I just wanted to give you some general updates on where we are with the ledge session, how some of your member adopted priorities are going, other policies to be paying attention to, maybe a little bit of a federal update, and then just want to get some feedback from you on some other areas and issues. So of the 105 days of the legislative session, we are at we've got 58 days down and 47 remaining. So we're well over halfway through the regular legislative session. There is rumor that there will be a special session. It's kind of moved. It's not probable yet, but it's definitely more than possible. So we've moved from possible closer to probable, but I wouldn't say it's a done deal yet because we haven't even seen the revenue forecast or the House or Senate proposed budgets. Once we see how those do or do not connect to one another, I think we'll get a better sense for how far off are they, and are they going to need additional days in order to reach an agreement on the budget. The primary reason why this legislature would be looking at an extended legislative session is, as you are aware, I am sure, that there is a budget shortfall, which means that the commitments of our legislature from the past several years in terms of what they have committed to paying for and the revenues that our state has been able to collect have not kept up. So there are more commitments than there is revenue coming in. So they have to do one of two things. They have to cut what their existing commitments are, but not basic education, because they can't do that. And or they have to increase revenue, otherwise known as taxes. There will probably be a combination of both. And so those are a lot of different needles to thread and people to upset, if you will, which means there's a lot of balancing that has to happen, and they may not get it done in 47 days, but we'll probably know within, I would say, the next 2 weeks if it's moved closer to probable as opposed to possible. The House of Origin cutoff is March 12th, which is tomorrow. And what that means is that any House bill has to have made it off of the House floor by tomorrow at 5 p.m.-ish. And that means if a bill is a House bill, it has to have been voted on by all of the House of Representatives favorably in order for it to progress through the process no later than 5 p.m. tomorrow. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're hearing in terms of tomorrow's bills, but it could be exciting for us. So more to come on that, a little teaser there. Then next week, we will see the state's revenue forecast come out. There are predictions, not surprisingly, that it's not going to look too good. It wasn't too good before the session started. They don't predict that any marked improvements have been made. In fact, it could potentially be even more challenging than what they had understood before the session. And therefore will have to make modifications to the final budget based on what they learn there. Then as House bills move to the Senate and Senate bills move to the House, they will be referred to one of two committees. If it's a policy related bill, if it's actually changing policy and not just fiscal, it will go to a policy committee and would have to be heard in the committee that it's referred to by April 2nd. And passed out of that committee, and then move on to a fiscal committee, and then would have to be voted out by April 8th. So as we've talked about a lot before, there are so many steps for a bill to become a law. It is not easy for a bill to become a law, and that's really good for all of us because there are lots of bills. And that means that many, many legislators and many, many constituents have had an opportunity to weigh in on every bill if it can possibly get to the opposite chamber floor 100 or so days into the legislative session. And then, of course, we'll hope for a sine die, which means end of session on April 27th. I got a couple links over here on the side. I am going to click on one. I know that some of you are really, really savvy as it relates to the legislature, but others of you are just kind of learning how to navigate all of these things. And so I wanted to just point you to, actually, from current slide, I've got hyperlinks in here so that when I share this with you, it will hopefully prove to be useful. I am looking at Marisa. Marisa, can you see a page that says House floor activity? Or do you only see the PowerPoint? You can't see that. Okay. I'm going to stop share and then reshare. Okay, now Marisa, can you see House floor activity?
I see it.
Thank you. Oh, and I can hear you too. That's great. Whoops. Okay. So what you are looking at, so right now, all of the Senate and all of the House are working together, Republicans and Democrats, to hear the bills that have moved through their origins, their chambers, essentially. You will note actually that both bodies are at ease right now. That's what these black boxes indicate. So that means they're taking a break. Could mean that they're eating lunch. It could mean that they are in caucus, as you'll see here over on the House side, which means they're discussing bills and how they might weigh in. That gives you an idea that there's no action happening on TVW, nothing happening for you to watch right now. The Senate's a little bit easier to navigate, to be quite honest, from here. If there were a bill that were about to be heard or a list of bills that had been identified, you'd see a hyperlink here underneath this section and you'd be able to click on it. Let's see if I can get there for you. I'm going to go back to the main page of the legislature and then go to the Senate floor activity. And so what I do typically, if I'm trying to figure out where the House and the Senate are in terms of which bills they're hearing, hopefully you've subscribed to their lists if you're tracking it, because they will actually send you an email and say, these are the bills that are coming up. And if you want me to show you where that is, I can happily do that. But on the Senate side, the order of consideration will tell you exactly what's up. This means that these are the bills on their list right now. And they basically do it in chunks. They'll take 3 to 5 and then deal with those, and then they'll probably go at ease and call up another 3 to 5. And you'll see that they have heard just in the last hour or so these 3 bills, 1, 2, and 3. You'll see the floor action vote here on the far right side. Looks like this Discover Pass day use cost one was really contentious. It was a 29 to 20 vote. It's usually, you usually see heavier on the front end. By the time it's gotten to the floor, it's generally you're going to see a lot more numbers in the front end than in the second. So these are typically going to be Democrats on the front. Typically Republicans follow yay, nay, or yay and then nay. Gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Abstain. Or absent, excused at the end. Then once they come back from being on break, they will deal with item number 4, 5, and 6. So those will be the next bills up. None of these bills particularly of interest to us right now, unless it has to deal with your professional life or another area, but that's just a good way for you to take a look at what's coming up. So there's a little there, but of course, if you're wanting to know, is this bill got a chance, then you can just call me and I will let you know there. I'm going to stop share and go back to the screen so I can talk to you about some other bills of note. Okay. So what's going on with your member adopted priorities? Hopefully you've been keeping track of this through In Session Live, our Thursday webinars, which are also recorded and posted to our website. Then we also have In Session at the end of every week that you could be reading. Our partners are also providing ongoing updates. You may go to the AWSP. Roz does a great high-level overview on her webpage that's accessible to everyone. Some of you may have access to TWIO, which is This Week in Olympia from WSSDA. If you don't, your superintendents most likely do, and you could access it from them. So those are a couple different ways you can be keeping track of what's happening. But I will tell you that at this point in the session, we have quote unquote lost a lot of the bills that were carrying the message of our priorities. But we still have 2 in particular that continue to be what we call the vehicle. Basically, that means it's the bill that's still moving for both special education and MSOC. But it is, in a nutshell, if you look at these different 4 categories, WSSDA's members prioritize really 4 positions for this legislative session: SPED, MSOC, and Transpo, which some of our partners refer to as the big 3, but we also had staffing on our priorities document as well. Staffing really didn't have much traction this session. 5120 was a bill introduced by Senator Nobles to address and give weighted funding for LAP Title I schools. They did hear it in Senate Early Learning and K-12 early in the session, but we had heard from Senator Wellman that she did not plan on progressing that bill, but wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to have a conversation around it, and they did. This would be an area that we would want to continue to push on for future legislative sessions, but for the purpose of this one is in the background for us, or the rear view mirror, if you will. I'm kind of going from the bottom right corner. I'm going to go to the bottom left corner here. Our transportation bills, there were several transportation bills that were in motion for this legislative session. So I'm just going to take a pause. If you're joining us and your microphone is not muted, could you please do so? Because we hear some background noise.
I am when I get.
Thank you. So 5187 was Senator Wellman's bill. It was the one that would partially fund special passengers, and the particular emphasis this year was on students experiencing homelessness. There was some amendments coming forward to add students in foster care. That bill did not progress. However, we have heard that it is more than possible, closer to probable, that there will be some dollars in the final budget that would enable the state to allocate some additional funding for special passengers, particularly for students with disabilities. So we'll see what that number is. I think we'll have a sense of things in the Senate version of the budget. The House version of the budget will come out first. We were anticipating as early as this week seeing some version of it, but it's probably more likely next. My guess is that it won't include anything about transportation in that, because it was the Senate version that that was moving the transportation conversation forward. So we'll kind of get a sense for maybe if something will move forward there. But more likely, we're going to see movement in special education and material supplies and operating costs. We've lost several bills with special education. Well, I will say we lost the most comprehensive and fully funded version of the bill. That was Representative Paulette's 1310. It did not move out of House appropriations. However, House Bill 1357 did. This is Representative Monica Stonier's bill. Even she's a little bit disappointed in it. She wanted to have higher levels for the multiplier in the bill, and wanted to include removal of the cap, but based on her caucus leadership, she was sort of being a good soldier in this regard by keeping it at a level that their caucus thought was more possible for funding in this legislative session. So 1357 is still alive, but I will tell you that it is still sitting in rules. Actually, that might not be true. I think it is on second reading, which means that it is on a list of bills that could be heard before 5 o'clock tomorrow, but might not be. We don't have a strong sense for that, because the House knows that this Senate bill is a preferred vehicle for special education amongst stakeholders. The House may decide not to move 1357 forward and just continue to negotiate through the Senate version of the bill. I have another slide following this that gives a little bit more of an overview of what 5263 does. But it is, of these three, well, of the bills that are the two bills that are still alive, it has the highest funding levels available to us at present. Although it's not as good as we would have liked, it's better than any other option currently. What we have heard is that this may be the last bill of tomorrow, which is interesting, because typically they save the last bill for something really, I mean, it is exciting, but often by exciting, I mean contentious. Because if you save it to the end, that means that people are motivated to move it along, as opposed to take up time when other bills can't be heard. So there may be a strategy here that we're ending tomorrow on a positive note, on a hopeful note for public education. We also know that the new Senate floor majority leader, who was previously Senator Billig, now is Senator Peterson. And Senator Peterson is a huge proponent for special education funding. His spouse is a teacher in Seattle Public Schools, and therefore understands even personally how important this funding is. So we anticipate that this bill will be heard before cutoff tomorrow, and it might even be the most exciting fireworks of the day. So something to keep an eye on. So moving over to MSOC, both of these bills are alive, but I will tell you that House Bill 1338, which was our preferred vehicle initially for MSOC, was cut significantly in House appropriations before it moved to the floor, and now is a lesser version of MSOC funding than the Senate bill. And so it is still this is the one that's still sitting in rules, which means that's the committee that bills go to prior to moving from the fiscal committee to the floor. It's oftentimes where bills go to die, I hate to say. I know the language of dead and alive sounds so drastic, but it really is a place where bills might go no further, is the Rules Committee. So it's sitting there and hasn't been pulled to the House bills list yet. My guess is that that means they're probably not going to pull it. There are a lot of other bills that have been pulled, including things about shrimp and other very important matters. But this one has not been pulled from House rules. So it may remain there and we won't see it progress. And the House may be hedging their bets that since there's a Senate version of this that stakeholders prefer, that's 5192, that would be a more likely vehicle for us to continue to support. So the good news is 5192, which is the Senate version of MSOC, has been referred to House Appropriations. It's already passed off the Senate floor and has already been referred to House Appropriations. So we will hear it again in committee, hopefully, if they schedule it, which I assume they will, sometime within the next couple of weeks over on the House side. So let's take a look a little bit at what these bills, I just focused on the two vehicles for MSOC and SPED, and I pulled these numbers from my colleague Dan Steele over at WASA, who is a number savant, if you will. And so this gives you a sense for how the bill originated, which is what you'll see sort of in green here and struck through, and what it is now, which is highlighted here in yellow. So it was a better version of itself when it was first introduced. It is still moving the needle, but it certainly doesn't get us to where we want to go. But our hope would be that in hearings, we were able to provide testimony to support keeping it at least here and more as the bill progresses. So those are the numbers currently in the Senate bill version, and a couple of the policy changes that would occur as a part of it. And then on the SPED version, which is also the likely vehicle, you'll see the numbers have changed. I should have highlighted this 1.32 in yellow. It was a better version of itself when it started, but it's still it is still good. It still moves the needle down to a single multiplier at 1.32. Distributes the awards quarterly, gives OSPI some duties to set aside funds, and it also eliminates the funding cap. So this is the enrollment cap has been a difficult one for our legislators to really understand, including this bill's sponsor, who had previously been opposed to removing the enrollment cap entirely, Senator Wellman. But she recognized over the interim, probably because of a lot of collective education and advocacy efforts, how important the removal of the cap really is. So that's still included here, and the hope would be it stays. So that's where those two bills are. Now, the reason why I don't get too hung up on the numbers and would encourage you to The way this would change your advocacy efforts would be if you took the numbers in the current versions of the bills and in your communication with your legislators said something to the effect of, this is what our total need is. If the current version of the bill were to pass, this is what we would receive, leaving a gap in between the two numbers. Because in most cases, especially with MSOC and maybe in many of your cases with SPED, there's going to be a gap between what you need and what this bill would fund. Which is unfortunate because we did have a version of the MSOC bill and a special education bill that in almost all cases would close the gaps between what you need and what you are getting entirely. And it's looking like we're not going to get that in either MSOC or SPED. It's going to be closing the gap, not eliminating it entirely in both situations. Oops, I didn't mean to stop share. I wanted to share one more thing with you here. I guess what I would pop, Marisa, are there any questions in the chat for me? Nope. Okay.
No, they're not.
So my PowerPoint to website is a little bit clunky. So, but if you don't mind, I do want to take the opportunity to sort of tell you about where some of these other policy bills are, but also show you how you can fish on your own, if you will, because it is really interesting how the Washington State Legislature website is set up. It is really meant to be user-friendly. And again, I am always here if you have questions, and it might even just be easier to email me and say, where is this bill and does it have a chance? And I'm happy to answer your questions at any time. But also sometimes it's kind of fun to figure out where things are. It's like a little mystery. So simple majority is a bill that we have seen almost every legislative session that I have been a part of. And this session, it has progressed significantly farther than we have seen in the last 6 or 7 years. But there are still some things to work out. So I just wanted to show you where it is in the process. And this is how you would identify whether or not a bill at this point in time still has a chance. So I'm going to stop share and reshare because it seems like that's my best bet. Are you seeing the screen? So 5186 is it is now a true simple majority bill, thanks to Senator Krishna Dawson, who was a school director out of the Peninsula School District and was just appointed to the Senate and is on the Early Learning and K-12 committee. Really excited that she is a part of that. She brought forward an amendment on the Senate side that moved it from 55% down to a true 50% simple majority. If you want to know where a bill is in the process, you're really looking down here. You're looking at the bill history list. The longer this is, probably the better. It means it's still going. You will note that it is still in the Senate, because if it had been passed out of the Senate, it would say in the House down here, but it's not there yet, because what this means, it has been passed to the Rules Committee for second reading. So it could get pulled from Senate onto the Senate floor for a discussion. This would have to happen before tomorrow at 5 p.m. And we quite honestly really don't want it to happen unless we know that there will be at least, this would assume that all the Democrats would vote for it. We would still need 3 Republicans to vote for it as well. We are not aware of any one, much less 3 Republicans at this point in time who are willing to vote for a simple majority bill. That is pretty typical from year to year. We have heard previously that they might be willing to do 55%, but there was a pretty strong 50% push this year. So we may not see this one come to the floor this year. We would rather not see it come to the floor for a debate if we don't know the votes are there than for it to come to the floor and fail. Because if it comes to the floor and fails, then we probably wouldn't see a version of this bill again for another couple of years. So that's how you'd know where it is. And if you're looking for an overview of any bill, because it changes through the process, you're looking at the bill report, the bottom link on the bill report. So this will give you the Senate bill report, and you're clicking on that. Marisa, can you see the brief summary of the substitute bill? Great. And I would encourage you to read the whole thing because the devil's in the details, as you know. And sometimes some really important implications for our system are missed in the brief summary of an overview. But this gives you a general idea way better than a bill title can about what the bill does. So you'll see it moves the simple or the supermajority threshold down to 50% for school bonds. Remove school facilities from the definition of public facilities for impact fees. So this current version of the bill would actually, it was an agreement that if they went down to a 50% simple majority for bonds, then builders would not have to pay impact fees to school districts. So WSSDA actually did not weigh in on this bill because we understood that there were several school districts who would be harmed by the removal of impact fees. So we've been supportive of the concept of a simple majority, but never at the expense of harm to one or more school districts. Individual school districts and independent lobbyists representing school districts who wouldn't be harmed by the impact fees weighed in strongly in support of this bill. So it's a little bit of how things happen. I'm not saying it's totally dead. You never know what might happen in the final hours. But for now, without any Republican support, it just doesn't stand much of a chance. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I think what I'm gonna do instead of pulling up the actual PowerPoint, which you will have access to, I'm going to pull up the bills that I wanted to be sure you had a sense for what was going on with them. And that way you can get a sense for where they are in the process. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about transition to kindergarten. This one has been sort of this perennial issue because Representative Santos has had particular consternation around the transition to kindergarten program, which she considers a policy as opposed to a program. Meanwhile, we understand many districts have strong and robust transition to kindergarten programs and have been building them over the last several years. So good news is that the House version of the bill that would have basically required you to, if you have a transition to kindergarten program that's grown over the last several years, to cut your numbers back to 2023 levels. That bill was contentious even coming out of House Education, even amongst Democrats, the majority. So it did not progress. So Senator Wellman on the other side, recognizing that this is a policy issue that costs money but is not protected within basic education, drafted a bill that would essentially require school districts to pause on the growth of their program. So it wouldn't remove any funding, but it wouldn't allow any growth of your program for the time being. It's basically a pause on the program while you maintain what you have. And if you wanted to see where it was, you will see that it's been placed on second reading by the Rules Committee. So that means it's on the potential run list for the Senate. So it could end up on the floor. We don't know for sure. But from the perspective of our future legislature, trying to protect itself, so the current legislature protecting itself from its later legislature, it might want to address this so that there's not continued growth and therefore continued cost. So I would be surprised if they don't pull this to the floor, but it could be considered necessary to implement the budget because if it is deemed as a cost savings, in a couple weeks, they don't actually have to hear the bill. They could decide to bring it back if it was necessary to implement the budget. I know it's very confusing and who knows how these things work, but it may be dead, it may be not, they may pass it, they may not. Everything remains to be seen. But this gives you a brief summary of the bill here, that it limits the growth of the program starting in this next year. Okay, so keep an eye on that. The next policy I wanted to be sure to review with you was one that we just became aware of and still have a lot of questions about, actually. It's depreciation for electric vehicles. Let me get this up. This bill number is 5780. And what this bill would do is essentially require school districts to pay back the state in the case of electric vehicle bus depreciation schedules. Sorry, I'm multitasking here. It's not good. I'm gonna.
Marissa, you muted yourself somehow.
I sure did. Lucky you guys. Thanks, Trisha. You'll see that it was just recently referred to Ways and Means and is actually scheduled for this Thursday in Ways and Means to be heard. So what we're trying to get clarity around is, does this apply to electric vehicle buses that you already have that were granted to you by some state or federal source? We are assuming no, because it wouldn't make sense for them to take money away from you after you had been gifted or granted electric vehicles. But we can't assume logic is at play here. And so we will get more clarity. This is something to keep an eye on if you already have electric vehicles in your fleet and you receive those electric vehicles through a grant or some other mechanism that was gifted to you, and how that would impact your depreciation schedules moving forward. Our hope would be that we could have a conversation with the legislature about it not being appropriate for them to retroactively, essentially, for lack of a better term, penalize school districts who had been grant funded electric vehicles as cost savings to their district. So stay tuned with this one. This may be one of those bills that they're trying to save money, either retroactively or just as they're thinking about the future. So we will keep you posted on that one. The next bill that I wanted to draw your attention to is the National Board Certified Teacher Program. That's Senate Bill 5737. This bill will also be heard in Senate Ways and Means this week. I'm going to pull it up, 3757. Oops, I got the numbers wrong. I think I inverted them in my brain. Yeah. Derek Sarley, who is the WSSDA board president and also the board president for Walla Walla Public Schools, will be testifying con on this bill. It's not as bad as we thought. The hyperlink in the PowerPoint presentation actually takes it to the substitute bill that's going to be in front of the committee this week, but it still essentially would reduce the total amount of benefit or bonus or payment, depending on how you want to frame it, and different legislators will frame it differently for National Board Certified Teachers. This was in Governor Inslee's proposed budget just before he was outgoing, that he essentially removed the entire funds, all state funds for the National Board Certified Teacher Program in its entirety. That was obviously very concerning. Multiple stakeholders testified as such during the House and Senate Appropriations Committee meetings. But now we're seeing an actual bill to carry that conversation forward just before we're seeing drafts of the budget. Because National Board Certified Teacher Program payments are not protected as a part of basic education, they are trying to find a way to cut costs that would benefit the state shortfall, essentially, that would contribute to closing the gap there. And this could be one of the victims of that effort, to be quite honest. Let me, I actually want to pull up the language around the hyperlink in the Thanks for your patience. I'm not going to be able to pull it, but in the notes, it will reiterate for you that that the Senate staff anticipated about a $30 million savings. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm mixing that up. Hold on. The effort of the substitute bill would be to lower the base annual bonus to $3,000 for the 25-26 school year, and then allow for it to be increased by inflation instead of eliminating it entirely, which was the original proposal. And that in the high poverty schools, the bonus would it would be lowered to $3,000, and then there would be an inflationary adjustment instead of eliminating the bonus. So if the annual bonus is $6,200 for other schools and high poverty schools is 5,000. Those are the original base is what we understand. So it doesn't eliminate those numbers. It reduces them to 3,000 with an inflationary increase. So it's still not good, but I guess as we would say right now, it could be worse. I hate using that expression, but that seems to be the case in some places here. Now I'm going to take you back to the PowerPoint presentation. Play from current slide. Hopefully you read in session last week and got a good overview on the unemployment insurance for striking workers issue. If not, I would encourage you to do so. I'm going to upload that into the chat for you as a document. But essentially, WSSDA and WASA co-authored a letter that we sent to all of the Senate. We started in Ways and Means before they heard it in committee, and then we sent it to the entire Senate body before they heard it on the floor. Senator Wellman, who was one of the co-sponsors of this bill, decided to vote in opposition to it. So we may have gotten to her, which shows she was listening and recognizes that there may be a detrimental impact to school districts. However, her sources within the legislature, so budget staff and other Senate staff, had told her, well, because school staff aren't allowed to strike, this wouldn't apply to them. And that's what she told me. And I think we all recognize the reality of the fact that in fact, educators do strike, and therefore this would likely apply to them. So if it passed the Senate, we're going to have a harder time in the House. And we do not encourage you as an individual school district to weigh in on this. It puts you in a precarious situation with your labor partners. However, we will continue to be in conversation at the statewide association level with our representatives about why this is detrimental to school district, essentially from the perspective of it being an unfunded mandate. Senate Bill 5772 is still in motion, and I'm going to pull this one up just so I get the language right. Essentially what it means that if there are school districts that more than 33% of their student enrollment is in ALE programs, alternative learning programs, that it would impact their total LEA, how much they would receive in LEA. I'm going to pull this up so you can see it. This is another one of those quote unquote cost savings bills. I'm not quite sure how much they think they would save from this, but if you are a school district that has more than 33% of your student body who are part of the alternative learning program, I would encourage you in this case to reach out to your legislators, particularly on the House side. Well, actually on the Senate side right now, because they haven't heard this on the Senate floor yet. But they still could end up using it at the end necessary to implement the budget. So if you have ALE programs, particularly more than 33% of your total enrollment, highly encourage you to reach out to your legislators to let them know how this would detrimentally impact your, your student learning, the programs that you offer, and then your total district funds. Okay. Got a couple more to review with you.
So far, Marissa, the only comment has been from Mandy O'Hara from Hoquiam on Senate Bill 5780, hoping that if this, knowing or just wanting to know how it plays out as they were granted 2 electric buses. I would say my own school district is in the same position. So
Yeah.
I think there are quite a few folks that are curious about how that will play out.
Yes, as are we. Thank you for noting that. Like I said, we will keep an eye on it and be in communication. I will likely put a report, an update in session this week, just to say how the hearing went, in particular, whether or not it would impact districts who already have electric vehicles from grants, or if it would just be future or also include the past. Okay, 2 more bills just to tell you about, and in the interest of time, I'm not gonna open them up because my computer is being challenging. The financial literacy bill does look like it's still in play. There's a House version and a Senate version. The Senate version is titled Learning Standards and includes computer science as well as financial education. And the House side has financial education specifically. There's a low fiscal note on these bills, I will tell you, because the interpretation of our legislature is that because they enable you to embed the existing learning standards across the curriculum, not as a standalone course, their interpretation of that is that it does not cost districts money. We have continued, like with you, to try to help inform them about how when you add things, even learning standards that make sense or good for students in existing coursework, it still adds time, requirement of resources, teacher training. All of those things do come at a district cost. I see this as at least the financial education part is probably a foregone conclusion based on the will of both Republicans and Democrats at this point. On both the House and Senate side, but it's an opportunity for you to continue to communicate just what you're dealing with and the very full plates that you already have. And then last but not least, this is a bill that I've shared with you previously and continue to draw your attention to, because this really does take your communication with your legislators about your concern. Most specifically, this bill puts into place an additional complaints process when it is perceived by any member of your community or within the school system that a superintendent or school director has woefully disobeyed the law, that there is a complaint process added where public comment or public opportunity to provide input is codified into statute. School board would be responsible for holding those public meetings. If compliance was not reached, then OSPI would be able to more directly intervene. And as part of that intervention, one penalty could be to withhold up to 20% of your state allocation to redirect for essentially process improvements within your own district. But obviously that would come at huge financial implications to your district if that were the case. One of the main concerns we've expressed to legislators about this is that which law are we talking about? State or federal? Who gets to decide that? How much chaos will it create in the meantime? And particularly another mechanism by which community members are put in a position to be in conflict with school directors and superintendents, as opposed to it feeling more like a partnership and a conversation. It's particularly codifying, yet again, this opportunity to have some volatility and a lack of civil discourse. So we will continue to bring that up, but I would encourage you all not just to express your concerns, but also how do you at the local level grapple with those issues? We know that school boards have put very strong public comment processes in place, that there is a complaint response process that you are required to have in place and is publicly available. How is that going for you? And when there is a challenge or a problem, how do you mitigate that? It's one of those opportunities for us to again educate about how local control works, and that this is not necessarily the right place for the state to intervene. The last thing I just wanted to share with you, there's more that we don't know about what's going on at the federal level than we do, but just a couple communications that we've received from our National School Boards Association, as well as from the governor's office just within the last 24 hours, I wanted to share with you, that currently our understanding is that the continuing resolution going through the Senate right now does not include any cuts for education programs. That's the communication that came out from NSBA currently. However, there is an effort to eliminate so that's the education programs. And while this does affect education, it's in a different department. There is an effort to eliminate the E-rate funding to provide wireless internet hotspot devices. If your district is a beneficiary of that, I didn't quite get a sense for how that would impact Washington. That would be something we'd really like to know, and that you should definitely communicate with your members of Congress. If you have hotspots that your students and staff rely on in order to access the internet, that would have an implication there. And then we also heard from our governor's office this morning that there are some entities within the state, some state agencies that are having impact to their grant applications, either existing grant funds or applications currently in the works, because of particular words like equity being included in that language. I just let you know that because that's what we've been informed by our state partners. There's no action necessarily for you to take as a result of that. But there's a lot of confusing information out there, and to whatever degree we can provide you with something that we know, I wanted to let you know there. So there's a lot of things swirling, and we still have a lot of days left in the legislative session for decisions to be made. The other I wanted to share with you, don't know if you saw this during the Super Bowl, but there was a commercial from the Washington Research Council, which will have its own perspective. So I don't mean to share anything that's considered partisan. I just want I'm going to share two things with you. One is a resource that you might see or have heard of that might be considered a little more right-leaning, and then another one from Senate Democrats, just to give you a sense for how different the opinions are about our funding shortfalls right now. And again, I will share this with you because I think this is worth a read. And whenever you see policy brief and budget shortfalls in a document, you might just tune out automatically, but I will tell you that this is a short one. So it's worth the read, and it's got some charts and graphs in it. So it's fairly easy, just 3 pages. But it is the perspective of this research council that it would be possible for our state legislature to address the shortfall problem without raising taxes by making cuts. So, and that cuts alone would help to solve for the problem. So there's definitely a segment of our own legislature, as well as our own membership, as well as our own constituents who would ask for there not to be an increase to taxes. And here are some of the reasons why they might give. And then meanwhile, like I said, I will share another perspective. The Senate Democrats just released this document that lists a variety of revenue or tax options that are on the table. And so I think it's important for you to see sort of these varied perspectives on what the right way to go is in terms of closing the gap on that shortfall. We're going to hear more about these proposals and the reasons why they might be a good or bad idea over the next few weeks, and possibly into a special session. And a lot of this is really outside of WSSDA purview. We have no member adopted positions that allow us as an organization to weigh in on modifying the advanced computing surcharge cap, as an example. So I share this with you to say that a lot of these conversations are going to be led by our legislature, and our labor partners will be involved because they do have the ability to weigh in and inform these decisions, and are asking of us to weigh in. And so it's a really delicate issue, because while we are asking for additional resources to fully fund basic education, you may hear from your own legislators, well, then will you support these tax packages? And as a state organization, I am not able to say yes or no to that. I can only return back to the paramount duty of the state is to fully fund basic education. Special education, material supplies, operating costs, and transportation are part of basic education. We will leave the revenue and tax conversations to people who are experts in that area, and we would ask that you fund the basic obligations of basic education through the general fund, because that's their responsibility, existing and ongoing responsibility. So I'll put these in the chat, but know that there's more coming as it relates to those topics. And this will give you an idea of how those conversations are going. But I will ask you, when you have an opportunity to read last week's in session, if you haven't already, I would ask you, sometimes I struggle to identify what would be the most helpful information for you to know at what level right now. So some of it is like, I'm taking a temperature on the conversations that are going on at the legislature that week and sharing with you what we know in that moment. But I don't know if it's exactly what you think you need. And so I am going to put a PDF version of last week's in session into chat, and I would ask for your feedback. Is this the right kind of information? Is it the level of depth that you would ask for? Are there any particular policy issues you'd like to see us unpack in greater detail? What things are really helpful? Got some feedback already that having side-by-side charts that compare versions, like all the MSOC bills with one another, which was embedded into the in session last week, that was really helpful for at least one of our readers who let us know. So it's a great opportunity for us to refine any offerings that we currently have to better meet your needs for the remaining weeks of the legislative session. And the only way I'll know how to do better is if you tell me. So put a couple things in the chat for you to have. I will include the PowerPoint presentation as well. We are at time, but I would just offer that I'm available if you need anything. And I'm grateful for all of your service.